Hi guys, Luton here, and so today I wanted to make a response to yesterday's video as it was quite surprising for several reasons. I guess the first was the amount of views I got on the video. Now granted, it wasn't an insane amount like 20 or 30k or something like this, but considering how my Battlefield content has generally not been doing so well, in part I guess to the fact that it's in general been slowing down, so for me to get like 4,000, 5,000 views in under 12 hours, for me that's quite a highly viewed video. So it's clearly something people have enough interest to care about, and it's not just something people see and think, oh, whatever to that. Secondly, the sheer amount of comments, over 350 again in the first 12 hours. I think in this one video I got more comments than all my others this last week combined. So again, it's clearly something people are vocal and care a great deal about. On top of that, the amount of comments that contain more than one paragraph of writing was pretty significant. Now, I've always encouraged you guys to write good, strong responses here on the channel, and not just one sentence of throwaway comments. So it was really great to see how many people were being engaged and sharing their own experiences, feelings, or ideas for how to improve this situation of the game. Now, in this gameplay, you can see me and Super are again just playing a random public server, this time on Propaganda. It's Conquest again, and we have a pretty decent fight throughout. This was one of the rounds that I said it was like decent overall, but you can see that yet again this was the same team that we were playing with on the video yesterday, and they are still focusing largely, the majority of the players, on the central aspect of the map instead of looking at different areas. And you'll see that me and Super push to different points throughout, and yeah, you know, we have some bad moments, good moments, but overall we are still sort of suffering that kind of fragmented team play. The thing that frustrates me still the most is this attitude we see all too often of people saying, hey, I paid my money, I'm going to play how I want to, and there is literally nothing you can do about it. Well, I would say to those people, you're right. And even if your opinion is bizarrely selfish when online games by their very nature largely focus around cooperating with others and working together to achieve something. I did reach out yesterday to several DICE and EA staff, and only AtFixNow, the DICE EA community manager, got back to me. He's been a really good guy and he's spoken to me before, he shared some of my videos around, but in response to what I was saying, he said that games change with time, it's simple, better or for worse, that's another question. He also said that you can't control how people play as they see fit. Now, this was probably for me the most frustrating response of the day, to be essentially told that what you think is right. People are going to do whatever they want to, and there is nothing we can or even will do about this. Whilst it be difficult, I don't agree that there is no way to encourage people to focus more on team play. Maybe in Battlefield 4 in the current stage that is correct, but looking to the future, there is a real opportunity to turn things around, to take Battlefield back to where it used to be, great public team play. Everyone knows that many people believe a tweak in scores would help to incentivize people to push for objectives. I think this is definitely on the softball end of the spectrum, but it would help a little bit for sure. Another is to remove or make the KD at the end of each round less focused or less obvious. Again, this would be a very small help. I think honestly though, at this stage, if we want to see any real change with the next Battlefield title in 2016, they're going to need to make some really significant changes. This could be something along the lines of creating mechanics so that you gain significantly more XP to access unlocks if you win the round, and less for a lose that will actually hinder your progress. These mechanics already exist in games like Total War Arena or World of Warships and so on. You know, they actively reward you for winning and focusing on the core objective of the game to encourage people to play and not just screw around and waste other people's time as well. Most people would say this was an obvious thing to do, and it seems like only in Battlefield, see what I did there, do we see them taking a stance that everyone should be rewarded no matter how poorly they are at playing. You could just, I've said this before, and people are like, oh man, look, that guy's 150 rank, whatever. You know, a trained monkey could get to top rank because all you essentially have to do is just play rounds. It's no judgment on how good of a player you are. It feels a little like those events where everyone gets a trophy even if you came dead last. The current tweaks and the first breaths of team play changes coming with the CT feel very much like closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, or maybe if you prefer a Tom Clancy analogy, there's no point defusing a bomb after it's already gone off. I've made a fair mention about EA marketing before and how I feel that it's contributed toward the overall change in attitude toward the game negatively. However though, when you really think about it, it's not their fault. If anything, it's a bit of a cheap shot by me and maybe others to blame the guys who are solely tasked with selling and promoting the game. Marketing for any product will always be showy, over the top, and focus on digestible sound and video bites of material. That's what marketing do to catch your eye. But it doesn't mean that we have, it doesn't mean we have to behave in a way that's replicated off of what we see there. If you go and buy, gum in a store, it's rare that you're going to go out into the street, treating everyone as if they're a friend you haven't met. They do that on the adverts, but you're not going to do that. People are going to behave how they would anyway, and so only a small percentage are really going to be influenced by, any of this sort of over-the-top dramatic marketing material. I suppose the only thing you could say is that it would help to just keep it in people's minds if there was more of a balance between the two different things, whether you're playing objective or whether you're going sort of crazy over the top stuff. And then, addressing the issue of people who cry out like, I paid my money, whatever, I do what I want, which we see in the comments, and generally you hear them crying this out around the community. They don't really represent the majority of players, these people. They're more like professional baiters who just enjoy irritating others because they know that there is no real answer when they cry out, I'm going to do nothing to help the team. What are you going to do about that? Well, nothing, obviously. Gladly, as I say, these people, they really just represent an extreme minority of players. And, just from the games I played yesterday and this evening, you don't really see many of that kind of person, and they're best probably just left ignored. Really, the key thing for me is it's not even so much about actually necessarily seeing a really significant change. That would be my best case scenario. But really what I want to see is I just want to see EA DICE, and with this next game I just want to see them take a more objective stance. This is like what I've said before. I've said this exact thing before, that on the top of my Twitter page I have highlighted where it says nobody expects everyone to PTFO all the time. That's not going to happen. What I want to see is I want to see DICE, EA and Battlefield just lean with a more objective stance to say, look, you can do whatever you want to, but this game is about playing, it is objective. It is about focusing on those core mechanics, because after all, that's what the game always was about. That's when you look back to 1942, Battlefield 2, Vietnam, all of these games, all these classic titles back then, 2142 to an extent. All of these games really focused on that aspect about the communication, the cooperation, the team play stuff. That is the roots of the game. That's what made the game, grow and become so much more enjoyable, because it had such a strong community behind it. And unfortunately it feels like that's been taken as like a springboard and then sort of expanded upon, but it's taken away from what that core element was. So I really want them to kind of just stand up and say, this game is about team play, this game is about objective play. That's the primary focus. And then we give you space to do other things on top. Most players are not anti-objective. They just need encouraging and incentivizing. Now for me, now that I've had time to calm down and think through what is actually going on, I think it's worth remembering that Battlefield as a series has been going on for some 10 years. I think everyone would agree that certainly a reasonable percentage of the change in gameplay we see now is generational. Whilst Battlefield has added much more content to appeal to a wider audience, at the same time it hasn't adapted well to assisting people to be aware of the core aspects of the game. There are ways that we could attempt to improve this. Right now on Squad, the new game in development by the team from Project Reality, as you start to load up the game, this is only a pre-alpha stage, and you have a placeholder screen which explains to you your role, your objectives, how to complete them. It also has various tooltips on, sort of how to set up your keybinds better and just generally what's there. I find it kind of crazy that all through Battlefield 3 and 4 and into Hardline, we haven't been utilising that loading screen. The loading screen where you're waiting for a next round to start? It's often up there for quite some time, and depending on what kind of system you have, it might be longer than others. We could be using that in a positive way to display messages and encourage and remind people, because often it's not about sort of telling people one time, you need to remind it. I mean, I often have to remind myself about things when it comes to different games that you play and things that you want to do, so you have to kind of keep that, it's that sort of repetition of just telling people like, hey, remember to do this, remember to do this, remember to do this. You got to keep telling people. And we could be using those screens to tell people what's happening. A lot of games have that. You remember back to like Modern Warfare 2 or COD or any of these things, they'd often have like in loading bits, they'd have like a little thing that comes up saying, hey, did you know you can do this? We should really be using that, and we could have done it all through 3 and 4 and Hardline. Instead of that, we've been hearing what's happening with Sky 5 News, and we could have been showing a simple image encouraging instead different objective tips, flanking. defending, focus fire on vehicles, healing, dropping ammo, pushing towards flags. The list of possible assistance is endless, yet this resource that's right there in front of everybody is just being completely ignored. The score, as we touched on earlier, is something that can be definitely looked at as well. A regular piece of feedback you get in relation to this is that nobody cares about the score. I would agree, most of the time in game I'm not really thinking about my score. Yet what is it that we hear all the time? Oh, people are going for the revives just for the score, right? So obviously it's not that alien to people. Also, as I highlighted previously, when I was talking about how we can improve team play, now, back in 2014, one of the things I brought up is that people don't care about score, but they sure care about their position on the board. Right now, due to the direct relation between kills and score, in that kills give you more points than nearly anything else, in a relative sense, generally the more kills you have, the higher your score and the higher you are on the board. So essentially, the game rewards you just for killing. It's something, I mean, it's like ridiculous. I think it's like 100 for one kill, and that's the same for getting a cap. So it's massively disproportionate. I remember back when I played hardcore competitive World of Warcraft PvP, for those of you who didn't know, and we were in a top elite squad. We were basically, our PvP team was the best on our realm. One of the guys that I used to play with all the time, named Jassing, he said to me one time, you can play the best and most important role in a round, but unless you're on the top of that board, nobody cares or remembers who you are. And he's right. And if you translate that to now, I don't know about you guys, but usually at the end of each round, you're looking at the top of the board, not at the bottom. There are some other things we could try out, like fluid scoring. This was my idea, that instead of having set scores for capture, they change relative to how well your team is doing in that game. So if you only have 1 flag out of 5, capturing base number 2 and 3 are going to be far more important to you than capturing, say, a 4th base out of 5. So in this way, it would reward people and represent them on the board at the end of a round more proportionally to what they achieved in game. So if you are capping that 2nd and 3rd flag, you get a much higher amount of points and score than you would if you were capping that 4th out of a 5th base, which you don't really need. Similarly, other things like vehicles are so much more powerful than just infantry, so it would make a lot more sense to value those more highly. Now, of course, with the commander, you did have that high value target thing, but to be honest, it should just be a base value. Destroying a tank is always going to be way more important than destroying just a player. Now, of course, you do get a little vehicle bonus and all the rest of it, but I feel like this should be significantly more, because it is really important. Taking down that tank is significantly important. It should be worth taking out like 4 or 5 people, even if you don't actually take out 4 or 5 people, because the potential, it's like, that's really what it's about. It's about the potential threat. That tank, yeah, if you destroy it and there's nobody in it, that's great, but there is the possibility that somebody could absolutely take control of a situation and destroy with that tank. So neutralizing it before it becomes a problem, before it becomes a high value target, in a sense, you should be rewarded for that initiative. So getting more points out of the gate on that target makes a hell of a lot more sense to me. Now, the honest truth of the matter is that maybe it simply is too late at this point. Maybe the changing game styles and lack of help in game to help drive people toward the objective, combined with DLC and social media designed to excite people about their guns and their stats, and not much more than this. All of these things together mean that we're in a different place than we were before. And to me, it doesn't seem likely that we'll see any changes coming either. DICE and EA don't seem to want to try out any of these possible ideas and are constantly just softballing, just enough to keep people placated, but without making any real changes. I implore them to prove me wrong, but right now that's how it feels and seems. All of the things we've seen, like the squad leader change, comma rose marker, score change on the snipers, these are things that people point out to me this week. These things aren't going to make any discernible difference. I had hoped that via the CTE we could have tried out some of the more dramatic changes across the past 12 months, so that we could have had some viable data to see if they had had any impact at all, or even worked mechanically in the game. All that time though has gone instead onto maps and guns, so now we have none of that to go on into the next game. And although you might be thinking, well, surely there is still time to do these things, think about it, how is that really possible? They will be designing the next Battlefield game right now. And it's unlikely that core mechanics in a game would be changed, so much later into 2016. I'm not saying it's definitely not going to happen, but it seems to me that the interest from the developers is improving or pushing team play. These things seem far down their list of priorities. If they had been, the other stuff would have been pushed out of the way and this would have taken priority. And I think it's just because they're looking at that kind of short-term goal. Rather, it's a bit like politics, really, you know. Politicians often look at the short-term goals so they can boost that popularity rather than looking at the overall long-term goal, where most people in the public don't also, you know, they don't really see the long term. It's not something that people identify with. However, often the long-term goal is actually it's actually in real terms more important, but they don't focus on that because they're only interested in that short-term boost. Now, in a sense, this is logical from a business perspective, making a game that's accessible to the widest audience possible, shipping as many copies as possible, and providing DLC content that's easily produced and appealing to that wide audience. It's all very straightforward and obvious if you're making a product that's interested only with just shifting as many units as possible. For me and for many long-time players though, it's frustrating, not just for myself, but for others. I have people coming to me when I've hosted my objective game nights saying, this was the best night of Battlefield I've had in 6 months, or sometimes the best games they've ever had. Why is this? Well, it's because these kind of games are not the norm anymore. I grew up with FPS games where you played to win, where you fought as hard as possible to beat your opponent. Stats and unlocks really were not that important. They were sort of subsidiary things. They were not the primary things you cared about. What you cared about was the gameplay and outplaying your enemy to win. But now with the way things have changed, the win and how your team performs seem almost secondary. Although weirdly not in other games, sports and racing games seem to remain as competitive as ever in public. RTS games also. Although you see a different, and think of things like MOBAs and stuff as well. Public games are still very focused. You don't very often see people in League of Legends just kind of wandering around, dicking around. You know, I have played a fair amount with some other friends, and again in that people seem very strongly focused. Back with RTS games though, you see like a different kind of apathy in these games, where say in Total War or Company of Heroes, if people in a public match lose an initial capture point or early losses, they'll often quit because they know the rest of the battle is just going to be an uphill struggle. So that's a kind of good example of how people just behave still in a kind of unconstructive way, but in a different way in other games. This sense of wanting a win without any effort is also pretty present in Battlefield. I remember that when you would get a steamroll effect in game, this used to be quite exciting. It was usually down to the fact that one team had allowed a crack in their control of the map, and then you would ride that wave until they went down. We used to do this mercilessly in World of Warcraft when I would command our PvP squad. We regularly used to spawn trap, and that's a group of about 10 or 15 players, right? We used to spawn trap other teams all day long we used to play 12-hour plus sessions day in and day out. There was a reason for this though, which was that in that situation it was almost deemed more acceptable because it was an elite, highly competitive ladder system. In that we were competing for points on this ladder system to gain prestige ranks in a server of thousands of other players where we competed for the top 10 places. It's not dissimilar to like League of Legends now. So in an FPS though, seeing steamrolls doesn't really serve much purpose. In that situation with WoW, it did serve a purpose because we had to ensure that we crushed our enemy to maximize our points to get ourselves higher up on that leader table. But there isn't really anything like that in Battlefield. So all it does is that for one team to just gloat or ride that wave of self-satisfaction. However, it's just ultimately a purely negative thing. Steamrolling an enemy team will likely mean that they just get frustrated, quit, and then you end up having the server balance, or it just kills the server. And then, you know, one side never really gets going. Players in a game who don't engage an objective are ultimately contributing to this because it allows one team to push so much harder, so their inaction directly contributes to other players' miserable experience as they get dominated into the ground by the other more aggressive and proactive team. Now the games have changed since 42, Battlefield 2, Vietnam, even 2142 to an extent, Bad Company 1 and 2. Bad Company 2 sits in the middle for me as like a crossover point between the time when the series was played more objectively. A lot of people say Bad Company 2 was like the best Battlefield game. It wasn't really the best. It was kind of like a middle ground. The best games were really sort of Battlefield 2, Vietnam, and also to an extent 2142. Actually, Battlefield 1943 as well, the little DLC release thing, it was like a standalone DLC. It was cheap, it was like £10, it was on PlayStation 3. That was also surprisingly one of the best Battlefield games that I've actually played. Highly team focused, and it was cheap. It had a fantastic audience. I remember when it came out, it was actually one of the highest selling downloaded games on the PlayStation Store when that one came out a few years ago. It was really, really good. Very simple, 3 classes, you couldn't change your loadouts, it was just literally pick up your gear and get into the game. And I think for that reason, if you know, that really demonstrated that these kind of games are more objective. So it's like with less you actually get more. Now I remember that Battlefield 3 was really where things started to feel different, with the choke point maps like Metro forcing people into insane grind fests with like 64 players. Who remembers like driving around the UAVs and stuff, just like road killing like lines of people? That's where it all started to seem a little bit stupid, and a lot more focus on killing and grinding out unlocks than winning. At the time, I recall though, I said that I wasn't worried about the influx. I literally remember saying this. I wasn't worried about the influx of new players because Battlefield was a slower game than other FPS. And so if new people came in and didn't enjoy that style of play, they would just leave, or that they would adapt to the style of the gameplay. What actually happened though was something that I couldn't really have anticipated, in that new players didn't really care about what they were doing in the game. This seemed like I couldn't get that into my head, that people could play a game but not really care about what it was that they were doing, just kind of running around just mindlessly. That seemed odd to me. I just couldn't, you know, couldn't balance that in my mind. The mechanics of Battlefield also didn't encourage them to play the objective, and this is the key thing. This is almost the real turning point, because Battlefield 2 and Vietnam and these older games, even Bad Company to an extent, because it had the core player base of, and this is so important, because it had the core player base of veteran and very strong objective players, the game didn't actually need to incentivize people to play the objective, because they were the kind of players who would naturally play that way. Very much in the sense that most people that play on armor, well, kind of, most people that play on armor, or at least these kind of more tactical games, you don't need to incentivize people because they're looking already for that kind of gameplay. Well, with Battlefield 2 and Vietnam and these older Battlefield games, that's what it was like. You didn't need to incentivize those people because that's the kind of gameplay they were looking for. Now, when it came to Battlefield 3, they were deliberately opening it up to a wider audience. So what happened then was you had all the veteran sort of objective players playing, but then you also had this influx of new people, and there was nothing there to tell these people, hey, you should be doing this, or you should be going here, or you should be doing that, because they were just coming in and doing pretty much whatever the frickin' hell they wanted to. And whether that meant sort of absolutely failing for your team, it didn't really matter, apparently. And because there was no push or incentivization within the game, that's how it then continued from that point. So we went from having a very core objective player base and audience, a really sort of committed, dedicated community, that changed to being this very widespread, open, just saturated community with a large proportion of people who either didn't know what it was that they should be doing, or just didn't care about what it was that they were doing, and had no reason to not, you know, behave in that way. There's other things like the media as well all contribute to that surrounding it, you know, the rewards. This continues, and then it just deteriorates further into Battlefield 4. There's probably a lot more I could say on this topic. I feel like I already had so many more ideas of things that I could discuss with this. So I'll just finish by saying that I didn't want to have some knee-jerk reaction to my frustration with the game. Many times I felt like, can I go on with Battlefield? How can I? Why won't the developers do something more concrete to try and bring back the gameplay that used to exist? I ask myself these things constantly. I personally don't see any major changes coming to the game to alter the way it plays or encourages people to play. The era of the ego playing and hype sensationalism is here right now. The next game, as I've said, will be a real critical keystone for me. And that, more than how I feel right now, will be a real decision on whether to continue then with the game or not. The developers hold the key to what the Battlefield series becomes. They have heard all the discussion in the community. It's up to them to decide where we go from here. Will Battlefield continue its path of quick sugar high satisfaction, or will we see it brought back to the roots of an epic war game which encourages and directs people into objective cooperation to provide some of the most hard-fought, tightly contested and exciting matches that you can experience. I can only continue to restate my opinion, and the growing voices of the community who are starting to realise that this game is going downhill quickly and that if they don't speak up, it's going to be too late. Hardline was a testament to the fact that you can't just put something out there with a Battlefield brand and expect people to just lap it up. Maybe the true positive legacy of Hardline will lie in the next release. That maybe they'll take on board what people are saying and not bring the same game to the table, but with a new look and feel. Other people have mentioned to me a lot in the past 24 hours that if I dislike the way the game is, that I should probably just step away from it. I still don't feel that I can do this, in the same way that when I was eventually leaving World of Warcraft, it took me months to actually step away from it completely. This is simply because when you've invested so heavily into something, it's very difficult to just snap disengage from it. WoW was a huge part of my gaming life for about 6 years. I pretty much played nothing else in that time. And Battlefield has been a similar thing for me through the past, 10 years. For me, it's been a major game that I have never really not been playing from one month to the next. To walk away from that, for me, is not a small thing, it's a huge thing. And I think that that's all I really have to say on this for now. Thanks for listening, and tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'll continue to discuss Battlefield and support it for as long as I feel that it's a game that I want to play and continue to be a part of. Thanks for listening.